Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of what I hope will be many different audio dispatches for the Left Chapter on YouTube. I'm Michael Laxer, the founder and editor of the Left Chapter, and today, in our first installment, I wanted to address, there's this natural tendency of people, in the midst of this terrible capitalist coronavirus crisis, with people losing their jobs, their livelihoods, many people falling ill. There's this tendency, of course, to rally around our leaders, to want to see the leadership from our politicians, and to feel a sense of, to reach out in this way, to feel a sense of stability, to feel that they're on our side and that they're working in our interest. And as a result, in times of crisis, as we've seen historically, the popularity of leaders often rises, at least temporarily, and I think nowhere has this sort of reversal of fortune in popularity been more pronounced than in Ontario with Doug Ford. I think it's pretty safe to say that, we know that just a few short weeks ago, Doug Ford was the least popular, or one of the least popular premiers in the country. He had, in the first year that they were in office, Ford and, his cabal of cronies had launched attacks on any number of sectors of Ontario society, from tenants to workers to, university students, teachers, and there were even rumors that Ford himself was coming up with an exit strategy to sort of find a way out of leading the Conservative Party into the next election in 2022. That's how towards rock bottom his popularity had gone. And I think that what has happened since then is quite a remarkable, given, I suppose it's been exacerbated by the fact that expectations were so incredibly low that the fact that he has been able to give a few barely coherent press conferences, and there's been sort of images of him loading various things onto the back of pickup trucks, has somehow made him emerge as this sort of Churchillian figure in this great moment of crisis. Don't worry, Doug Ford is going to fight the coronavirus on the beaches, etc. And I must say that this is totally unwarranted. There's absolutely nothing that has fundamentally changed in the orientation of his government or in the nature of the man to warrant this remarkable shift in the way that he's being popularly viewed. This is still the same Doug Ford that eliminated the measly 2 days of paid sick leave that was brought in by the Wynne government at the very end of their last term in office. They stopped the minimum wage hike from $14 to $15 an hour for the types of workers who are now being forced to work through the capitalist coronavirus crisis and who are being hailed as heroes somehow. Well, apparently they weren't heroes when, their wages were drastically cut in the first, one of the very first acts that the Ford government did at the behest of the horrible bottom feeders at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. We could go on and on. This is like this is the same government that reversed basically all of the new worker protection legislation, and and as I said before, that had launched attacks on countless fronts against the people of Ontario. But what's happened, they've actually not done anything to reverse that. The minimum wage hasn't been increased. Paid sick leave days have not been brought back. While there has been an eviction freeze of sorts in Ontario, landlords are still allowed to issue eviction notices, and there certainly hasn't been a rent freeze. There hasn't even been a freeze on rent hikes. We're not I mean, what's really happening is that we're seeing this sort of inflation of the man when it's much ado about nothing. They really haven't. It's not his approach to governance hasn't actually changed. It's just his image has changed. This is these are the same government. I mean, now we know the epicenter, the horrifying epicenter of the coronavirus in Ontario is in nursing homes, and these facilities were not being properly inspected since the election of the Ford government. After donations by the industry to Christine Elliott's campaign, who has now become, she's now the health minister in Ontario, the Ford government essentially got rid of proper inspections for nursing homes. Is this a coincidence? Well, I'm sure they would like us to think it's a coincidence, but we know that the consequences of this have been devastating. And I think it's important for us to. I mean, it's not just Ford. A lot of people want to rally around Justin Trudeau, but it's important for us to realize that these politicians and the politicians for the last several decades, since the rise of neoliberalism and since the entrenchment of permanent austerity, they've not been on our side. They're not on our side. They're not on our side now. They weren't on our side before. Nothing has changed since the coronavirus outbreak began. They are the bailouts that are taking place right now under the watch of governments like the Ford government or the Trudeau government help benefit corporations and the wealthy significantly more than they do working people. I mean, in the case of the federal benefit, there's been much ado about how everyone's getting $2,000. Some workers are eligible to get $2,000 a month. The truth is that EI still remains at only 55% of your previous income, if you can even get it, and that it's capped out at $570 a week, now down to $500 a week in some cases, with taxes not taken off, but it's still taxable. And the truth is that is a fraction of what a lot of the people who've now been laid off used to make. And again, not everybody's eligible. We built a system. We cut hospital beds, we cut services, we cut the public health infrastructure and public health networks. We've had this governing ideology of permanent austerity for a very long time. And the reality is that it has left us, it's now being exposed because it has left us in a state where actually fighting this situation and allowing people to do so without being afraid of losing their homes, of bankruptcy, of destitution, is very difficult. That's not the social order that we constructed. There is no real social solidarity. And what we're seeing is that the politicians are left with the ability to spew a lot of empty rhetoric, but it's not actually backed up by meaningful action in a long-term sense. I think it's time for people to get angry again, to be angry at politicians like Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau. These politicians, the psychopaths in the business community, frankly, and a lot of wealthy and upper middle class folk going on and on about heroes, working heroes, and sharing stupid stories of neighborhoods singing together, are the same people who opposed things like proper sick day leave, who opposed higher minimum wages, who have opposed safety standards, and we're all in favor of gutting regulations for decades now, calling regulations, health and safety regulations, for example, red tape, and I think with this exposure of the system, of the bankruptcy of the system, of the emptiness of the system, of the deep, deep human failings of the system right now, this is exactly not the time to rally around our leaders. This is the time to understand that the leadership in this country and leadership in the Western world and leadership in the capitalist world has been deeply flawed for a very, very long time. And in reality, we need to change the social order. We need to see a new direction politically, and we need to see entirely different kinds of leaders. And hopefully, what will come out of the crisis, the capitalist coronavirus crisis in the long run, is not a renewed sense of faith in the various leaders that we have due to their rhetorical ability, but rather a realization that we need to work together to build the kinds of movements, politically and socially, that will fight back against generations and decades of abuse and austerity that, the chickens of which are now coming home to roost. So Doug Ford, in reality, nothing's changed. And he's still the leader that he was before. The deeply flawed leader, definitely not on your side.